going on, everybody? It's your boy Farley here to do a response video. And the video that I want to do tonight is in response to Metal Mickey's 10 Best Albums of 1989. I just saw where Vinylizer John did a response to it. And to be honest, that is really in my, wheelhouse of years that I was really into metal, especially in '89, especially thrash and death metal. So I was surprised when I went through my collection at how many great albums were in 1989. I always say 1988 for me is the best year for metal. It includes so many great albums, especially my favorite, And Justice for All, my favorite album of all time. But as I was going through 1989, I was surprised at how close 1989 was to 1988 in terms of really great albums. So without further ado, I'm going to do my top 10. In proper Farley fashion, I do have to throw in a bonus. This one was so hard to leave out. It's the only album on my list that I don't have on vinyl form, but it's the Crossover Legends DRI, with, to me, really the start of their more thrashier albums. This is Thrash Zone. Had the opportunity to see them live about 3-4 years ago with Suicidal Tendencies, and they really blew me away live. So DRI Thrash Zone technically would come in at number 11, but I'm just throwing it in as a bonus pick. Now to the top 10 list proper. This was really hard too, especially 1 through 3 or 4 was really hard for me. Really, I think number 1 stood out, but 2 through 4 was a little bit hard. So without further ado, coming in at number 10, best heavy metal albums, 1989, we have Metal Church, Blessing in Disguise. Now, a lot of people like the more thrashier sound that they came out with their first few albums with David Wayne. I enjoy those albums a lot. I do enjoy David Wayne's vocals, but this album is probably the only one of his that I would go out of my way to buy. I really want all the 80s output Metal Church. It gets a little iffy for me after that, but I think this album is really good, and to me it's a nice mix of power metal and thrash metal. And of course, Badlands, the song Badlands was my introduction to the band. So Metal Church, 1989, Blessing in Disguise, coming in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is the only album, the only vinyl album I own of this band. I only own one other albums on CD, but this is one that hooked me immediately when I heard it, and that's The Headless Children by Wasp. To me, one of their heavier albums, not only musically but lyrically. And The Real Me was my introduction to Wasp. Now, my brother had listened to them a little bit, but didn't listen to them around me. But I remember him having some of their cassettes, and I can't really remember him playing them so much around me that I got into Wasp. So really, for me, my introduction to Wasp was this album. I have owned some of their other albums, but The Headless Children, to me, is their best album and definitely one of the greatest albums of 1989. Next, we have an album that introduced me to Earache Records and to grindcore, along with the Earache sampler that came out. This is Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, and the song that was included on that Earache Records sampler. First off, every song on there was just amazing. There was some kind of goofy stuff like Old Lady Drivers and some other bands on there that were kind of like, they weren't being serious. But of the serious bands on that sampler, man, I remember hearing Chapel of Ghouls off of this album and was like, holy cow, this is like whole next level heavy. So Altars of Madness, I don't know why I took this out of the sleeve to talk about it. Yeah, what can I say about this? So heavy. and really one of the forefathers of that movement of death metal mixing with grind to create a much faster tempoed but still heavy type of death metal. So put that back in there. All right. All right. Next up, we have, speaking of death metal, this is the Peaceville reissue of the classic 1989 album, Autopsy, Severed Survival. Now, this is the newer cover that's considered to be the censored cover, which just, it makes me laugh. So this is a picture disc, and the picture disc and the sleeve actually form one big picture. But this was considered to be the censored cover. That was too much, but this was okay. So, just another band, death metal band that really, to me, formed, you know, in the '80s. What death metal, especially in this case, what American death metal would sound like, especially like with that Florida sound that was coming out with bands like Obituary. And this has tempo changes. It's fast, it's slow. You know what you're going to get with this band? You're going to get heavy, mixed with lyrics about gore and death, hence the name death metal. So Autopsy, Severed Survival. Here's one that, this is another one that I kind of went back and forth on where to put this. There was an argument back in the day whether this was heavier thrash or whether this was death metal. Kind of the same argument that people had with bands like Demolition Hammer. It's like, where do they really fit? But I always considered them to be heavy thrash, and that's Corner, and this is No More Color. This was, I bought Injustice for All and a couple of other albums. And then I moved up because I was listening to like glam metal and 80s and some power metal that my brother got me into, and also some Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath. Then I got Injustice for All. So I made that leap from that type of metal to the thrasher sound of Injustice for All. And then Corner was really my step up into heavier music with this album, No More Color. Just a fantastic band. They're supposed to be releasing a new album. I have no idea when it's coming out. Of course, they had all their all of their albums reissued in the last year. So if you're wanting to pick up Corner, their OG pressings are outrageous. So pick up the reissues, although I will question the quality of some of the sounds. All right, so No More Color. All right, here's where it starts getting a little trickier. All right, so this band, I was a little bit late to the party on. Some of my friends were already listening to them. For some reason, I never really got into them until this album, Practice What You Preach by Testament. And I'm so glad I did get into them because I went back and listened to the other albums and was hooked. Definitely one of the forefathers of thrash movement. They're considered a little bit late to the party in terms of thrash, but to me, they'll always be considered, in my opinion, one of the pantheon of the thrash metal scene in the '80s. Testament, Practice What You Preach. There's not a weak song on this album. Side 2 is just as good as side 1, and I really enjoy the ballad. Blessed in Contempt. Time Is Coming. That chorus on that is outrageous, and of course, Practice What You Preach, which was my first video introduction to Testament. Like I said, some of my buddies were playing them before I got into them, but I remember seeing Practice What You Preach, and then I went out and got the album. One of the most underrated thrash bands that came out in the '80s, and I've talked about that before, how underrated they were, and continue to be. And I don't know if it's because they were from the United Kingdom, and at the time, really, Bay Area thrash was all the rage. But Zentrix, man, this album, Shattered Existence, when it hit, it was like it hit, and I live in Podunkville, USA, but it hit me and my friends hard. We all went out and got this album, and we all just were blown away by it. I remember us talking about this album a lot. But when I go back and talk to like people from different parts, of the United States that were into thrash at the time, it hardly ever gets mentioned, and I'm not sure why that is. But for some reason in the U.S., this was very hit or miss. But for me, definitely a hit. Every every song in this album, great. Matter of fact, the next few albums, they're just pretty much solid, beginning to end. Um, just man, and it was like a different sound. Um, and I'm trying to think of, I've thought about who might have influenced them before. Of course, the Bay Area influenced them some, but they got some other influences that kind of spiced their sound up in a different way from a lot of the other bands that we were listening to at the time. All right, now it's getting crazy. This is where it's really hard. The next, three? So hard. Nuclear Assault, Handle with Care, coming in number 3. This could easily be number 2. A lot of people might include this as number 1. What a great album from such a heavy band. If you go back and listen to Nuclear Assault, they were doing heavier stuff, and I mean heavier than thrash in some of their songs, way before Testament was doing it in the 90s. And almost to the point of like blast beats. If you go back and listen to some of their songs, maybe not this album as much as some of the earlier stuff, but yeah, they incorporated a much heavier thrash sound, I think, than people really give them credit for. But Handle with Care, another album where they were my first. This album was the first taste I had of Nuclear Assault, and of course, Critical Mass was the song and the video that really got me into the band. But just what a great album all the way through. And this is one where it may not hit you the first time when you go all the way through it, but the more you listen, the more you kind of get it, in my opinion. That's the way it was for me. When I first bought the album, I was like, "Oh, there's some great songs on here," but it's not solid all the way through. But boy, over the years, especially since I've gone back and rediscovered the music of when I was younger, the more I appreciate this album. All right. These two were hard. If you know me, you know these next two albums I absolutely love. But I think there's one or two songs that make the difference. And number 2, Fabulous Disaster. Man, every song on here a winner, but not every song as strong as every song that's on the number 1. But I absolutely love this album. This was a band that when I got into them hardcore. I was a huge, huge Exodus guy when this came out, and still am. This album, Toxic Waltz, definitely in the top 5 greatest thrash songs of all time. It's probably the greatest song to mosh to, that and some Anthrax tunes. But definitely a moshability rating of 10 on this album. But geez. And there's no weak songs on it, but when I went and compared the songs on it to the next album, I was like, the songs on number 1 are just a little bit better. The weaker songs on number 1 is just a little bit better than the weaker songs on number 2. Again, weaker does not mean bad. Every song on both of these are going to be just great tunes. And number 1. The more I think about it, the more I'm pretty sold on my choice. Overkill, The Years of Decay. Definitely their best album. This was not my introduction to Overkill. Under the Influence was my first Overkill album. And I remember liking it, but not all the way through. And then when this came out, all of me and my friends and everybody I knew that was in the metal scene were like, holy cow, this thing is just on fire. Other bands, were thinking about, let's go mainstream and let's change our sound a little bit. And then Overkill comes out with an album like this. Elimination, my favorite song by them. They experimented with Skull Crusher with a doomy stoner type sound, even a little bit of sludge maybe. Dee Dee Verney's bass playing is just amazing on here. Just Overkill in its prime. And Overkill now is pretty dang good. But this is Overkill in its prime. And this is the greatest heavy metal album of 1989. All right. That completes my list. Sorry it went so long. Um, it's just so much good music and so much really to discuss with these bands and these choices. A lot of these choices were very, very hard. Again, I know a lot of people would include some, some glam or some other type, maybe some sludge bands, but I wasn't into that in 1989 as much as I was with the thrash and death scene, and really the start of my affinity for grindcore. So I appreciate you all for watching this. Let me know what you think, and I would love to see some videos from some of you other guys and gals of your list. Great idea for a thread, Mickey, and so yeah, glad to do it. Everybody take care, and we will talk to you soon. And little pup's gnawing at my hand, but she says goodbye too, and take care. Farley out.